Looks good. Let's do it. All right, guys, welcome back. So for this week, still diving into football here with that coming up here in just a couple of weeks, which it's crazy to think about. I feel like this offseason has gone by very, very quickly. It feels like sometimes the offseason, especially in football, it drags a lot. And this is one of these rare times where it doesn't feel like it has dragged. Maybe it was because especially on the college football side, Ohio State's season kind of ended as abruptly as it did. Maybe that's kind of the reason for it. It wasn't Ohio State's last game was the last game of the regular or the college football season this time around, unfortunately for us. But with that being said, I did not do this last year, and I feel like this is a fun thing to do. It kind of sparks some debate and disagreement around the community, which is what makes, people like me and other people that do this a lot better, because it gives people the option or the availability to voice their opinions and maybe something that I or another creator has not thought about before, and maybe they change up their rankings too. I don't think I'm going to do like a weekly top 25 college football ranking. Just, I don't really see the point in doing that every year, especially with, I'm not ESPN, I'm not Fox, I'm not any of these major sports companies that are being, paid to do that kind of thing. I'm just not there, unfortunately, at the moment. So we're just going to do maybe a preseason one, maybe, getting into the playoff type one. Maybe I'll do like a projected playoff bracket once that gets starting to go up. And then maybe I'll do like an end of year one. But for right now, let's just do a preseason one. And we're going to try and do this all in one take. We'll see how far I get with that. But let's just jump right into it. And number one off the bat, I feel like a lot of people are going to kind of look at me maybe a certain way, but it is Oregon. Oregon is going to be my number one team up until probably the beginning of the year when we start playing football again, So Oregon, to me, feels like it has the best roster. Of those best rosters, I feel like Oregon has the best coaching staff with Dan Lanning and everybody that they have there. Dante Moore is back at quarterback. They have Dylan Raiola now as a backup quarterback, which is very impressive. We have not seen a backup quarterback that talented since, I guess you can say, Arch Manning, but the guy in front of him, Arch Manning that is, the guy in front of him was Quinn Ewers, and you could tell that a lot of Texas fans were kind of sick of Quinn Ewers by the end of his Texas career. And Oregon, it's like, we prefer Dante Moore, but if, something were to happen, worst case scenario, we would be all right taking Dylan Raiola. And he has not lived up to the hype that he had coming out of high school, Dylan Raiola, but I think he would be serviceable in a Oregon team that has so many people coming back, and even on like defense. We're not even talking about offense. Defense, you got the ukulele, his brother. I don't even want to like list them all off, because there's just like, you don't even know where to start. There's so many guys there in Oregon. They have the best roster, probably, I would say, coming back this year in theory. We said this last year about Clemson and Penn State. Look what happened to them. They ended up playing in a meaningless bowl game, ironically, at the end of last season. But coming into the season, it looks like Oregon is going to be one of those teams where you're going to look at and say, man, if we play them, we better give them our best shot, because if not, they're going to beat us. Oregon feels like that team that's loading up to get their first national championship in program history. And that would be cool. Oregon, for the past couple of years, even like when the playoff era started, they destroy Florida State in Jameis Winston's final game in college in the Rose Bowl there with their apple green uniforms. I remember watching those highlights as a kid and being in awe of that game. Winston has like the crazy fumble where he's like getting ready to throw it, but somehow it falls out of his hands, and the defensive lineman's able to go and scoop it up and score and really put that game away. They run into a juggernaut in Ohio State in 2014 with Ezekiel Elliott and Cardale Jones and all of them. And that was Marcus Mariota's last year as well at Oregon. And, ever since then, Oregon's been trying to get back to that national championship. And they've been close a couple of years. Remember, they were undefeated 2 years ago now in 2024, number one team in the country. They get the bye, the first round bye. Then they got to go play Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, basically in their backyard, and they get blown off. They get blown out and ran off the field by an Ohio State team that ended up going and winning the national championship. If you're Oregon, you scratch your head, you move on, and you say, well, that was just a bad game out of us. We beat Ohio State by 1 point in Autzen in the regular season that year. We can argue if Ohio State should have won that game. They probably should have with that offensive pass interference call. We can argue if that actually was. I tend to lead on it was not. I feel like that's just football, and you got to let them play at that point in the game. But you can argue that Will Howard, if he slid with 1 second left in that game, and maybe even Fielding doesn't even make that field goal because Lord knows that he was not reliable during his time at Ohio State. But, there's so many what ifs in that game. Ohio State comes out and blows the doors off of Oregon in the Rose Bowl and runs them off the field and ends their season. They go on and beat Texas and then beat Notre Dame to win their first national championship since that 2014 year when they played Oregon in the national championship. Oregon moves on. Then they come into last year, and they're riding high. They beat Penn State, which at the time was a great win in Happy Valley in the whiteout. A game that was really, really close and really, really tight. And it felt like Penn State, it was just a matter of time when Penn State was going to take over that game. And then Dylan Thieneman calls game in that overtime with the interception, and one of the most impressive wins that we thought at that time. Penn State, of course, ends up firing James Franklin and goes down the hill that they went down. And Oregon feels like they're riding high. They go in at home against Indiana, the eventual national champions of last year. They get a pick six off of Fernando Mendoza, something that no one ever did, the Heisman Trophy winner, of the future Heisman Trophy winner, that is. They get a pick six. It feels like all the momentum is there, and Indiana pulls out the win and kind of game controls them to death that game. And then I believe they do run the table for the rest of their year. I think they do. Yes, they go 11-1 because both Ohio State and Indiana were 12-0. And, they were kind of on the outside looking in, same position Ohio State was last year. But Ohio State lost the game to Michigan. Oregon had no such bad loss on their resume this last regular season. So they go in. They missed out on the Big Ten championship game, which kind of felt like a blessing in disguise. They beat up on, I believe it was James Madison. It might have been James Madison, actually. Let me look that up. It was definitely one of the group of 5 teams. I really should be more prepared for this, but I believe it was James Madison, though. It was James Madison, yes. So the score looks, they did beat them 34-51. They did beat them quite handily. James Madison made it a little bit more closer than it actually was at the end of that game there. They beat them in Autzen for their first ever home playoff game. They have the 5 seed. They go on, and I believe they played Indiana in the second round, if I'm not mistaken. They did. So they played Indiana. No, I'm sorry. They played Texas Tech and destroyed Texas Tech, and it was bad. It was a very boring game, defensive battle. Texas Tech's defense held up for a little bit there, but Texas Tech's offense could not get anything going, and the defense for Texas Tech finally gave out. Oregon shuts them out, I believe, for the first shutout win in the 12-team era. And that sucks if you're Texas Tech, because you had the bye coming into this game. You had, you're basically, you're playing Oregon. You had basically, a month to prepare for Oregon. And you come out and you lay an egg and you score absolutely 0 points in that game. So they lose. They don't lose to Texas Tech. They beat Texas Tech in the Orange Bowl. Then you go and play Indiana in the national semifinal in the Peach Bowl, and the wheels come off once again. That was bad. First play ends up being a pick six for the Hoosiers, and Indiana completely dominates Oregon from start to finish in that game. Dante Moore looked lost. The entire Oregon side of both sides of the ball, all three phases of the ball, really, Indiana dominated. They take care of Oregon, and they're left scratching their heads and licking their wounds this time in the national semifinal. And if you would have asked me before that game, I would have said I was picking Oregon to win that game because I thought the revenge factor was going to play a big part in that. Unfortunately for them, Indiana was the team of destiny that year. Indiana goes on and wins the national championship. And that's 2 straight years that Oregon has been the team looking from the outside on that national championship game and being like, man, that could have been us. And they were close last year. They did not win their playoff game the year before, but you have to imagine if Oregon gets by Ohio State in 24, they have a good shot of beating Texas and a good shot of beating Notre Dame. So you got to imagine that Oregon was thinking to themselves, that could have been us for 2 straight years now. And I think that this is a year where Oregon is really well set up to go on that run that they have been so desperate for there in Autzen. Moving on, number 2, Texas. Same thing it feels like. 2 years ago, they lose to Ohio State with the Jack Sawyer play. They really, really were close, and it felt like Texas was going to break free, and they just never did. And it felt like it was because of the quarterback and Quinn Ewers. And Texas was coming in to last year saying that this is going to be a year where Texas makes a run at that national championship game, and they were close last year, or the year before, I should say, and it just didn't work out for them. Their offensive line took a very major step back, especially early in that season. They lose to Ohio State on the road in Columbus, in an environment that was a top-notch environment for a noon kickoff. Then they go and lose to Florida, which really killed their playoff momentum, and unfortunately that was the loss that left them out of the college football playoff. And I believe there is one more loss on their schedule. I cannot think of it, though. That's really going to bug me now. Because they beat Texas A&M. They beat Oklahoma because that was the game where Oklahoma had their quarterback come back and did absolutely nothing. So Florida, Georgia, that's what it was. So they lost to Georgia in the end of the regular season. Not the last couple weeks of the regular season to really close that nail on their playoff hopes that year. But that Florida loss in the swamp, and they didn't get blown out. They only lost 21-29, but a Florida team that I believe had like 3 or 4 wins all year last year, that's a bad loss to have, especially if you were going to have a good had expectations to win a national championship like Texas did last year. Everyone was picking Texas to beat Ohio State in week 1. I picked Texas, I think, to win in Columbus last year in my prediction video, and to see Texas and what they truly were, especially in the beginning of the year, that was super disappointing. Arch Manning looked like he was not ready for it whatsoever, even though he had started games before, and he comes out and completely does nothing against Ohio State, struggles against UTEP and San Jose State, San Jose State. And it looks like Texas is in for a bad year. They end up collecting themselves against Sam Houston before losing to Florida, dominating Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry. They do survive against Kentucky that year, survive against Mississippi State, survive against Vanderbilt. Do you see what I'm saying here? There was a lot of surviving type games, and it didn't feel like Texas was going to take the season by the throat and make them enforce their way into the playoff, and anything can happen in the playoff. So you never know what's going to happen once you get there. Ohio State last year, or Ohio State 2 years ago, Indiana last year, Miami last year, Notre Dame 2 years ago. I know those are all 4 of the national championship contenders for the past 2 years. But you know what I mean? Oregon, who was ranked 2 years ago number 1 and undefeated, the only undefeated team left in the Power 4. and they don't even win a game in the playoff. Anything can happen. And Texas just didn't feel like they had that, almost second degree of push to go and make that playoff run. So, like Oregon, I feel like they're going to have a roster that is ready to make this run. Arch Manning is coming back. That offensive line is coming back. Cam Coleman is in from Auburn, the transfer from Auburn. The defense is the majority of their defense is back. They did lose a couple of pieces, but the core of this Texas offense and this Texas team really is back. And I feel like this is, without being said, I feel like right now they look like the most talented team in the SEC. And I know we said that last year and it did not come to fruition whatsoever. But I feel like right now, with another year under Arch Manning's belt and a full year as the starter, as the guy that has the keys to the kingdom in Austin, I feel like that's going to be a big advantage for Texas. They are, as far as I'm concerned, the best, most talented team, I should say, team in the SEC. So they're at my number 2 spot. Ohio State at my number 3 spot. And this is strictly because of Jeremiah Smith. I feel like Ohio State this might be a year where Ohio State is on a bit of a rebuild. And I know we always say all the time, Ohio State doesn't rebuild, they reload, but this might be the exception to the rule. Jeremiah Smith is coming back. Julian Sayin is coming back. Bo Jackson and Isaiah West are coming back. The majority of the offensive line is coming back. They are losing a lot of guys on defense. Sonny Styles, Lorenzo Styles, Caleb Downs. I could go on and on with that defense. I almost said Lathan Ransom. That was 2 years ago. But you know what I mean? There's so many guys on that defense that are leaving, and they are bringing some people in. Terry Moore, the linebacker, Christian Allegro. I think that's how you pronounce his name, at least. I'll get better at pronouncing names. I'm sorry. But he's coming in from Wisconsin at linebacker, somewhere that Ohio State is going to get tested all year. They have one of the toughest schedules in the entire Power 4. Oregon, Indiana, Michigan, Texas. Those are just 4 games. Iowa, on the road in Iowa, a place where Ohio State has struggled in the past. This schedule feels like there's a lot of landmines for Ohio State, and this could be a down year for the Buckeyes. But they are my number 3. Jeremiah Smith is in his last year. More than likely, this is going to be Julian Sayin's last year. All of that offensive line is probably going to be their last year. Young defense. You have young wide receivers, Chris Henry Jr., Brock Boyd, who looks like a stud. There's so many wide receivers in that room. Brandon Inniss is back for his last year. And for Ohio State, I feel like this is more of a wait and see type thing, but they are not in that category of a do or die type roster right now. They got their national championship a few years ago, and the expectation in Columbus is to win a national championship every single year. But this doesn't feel like a do or die year, unfortunately. And this is Jeremiah Smith's last year, and it is going to suck if Ohio State doesn't at least make a run. I feel like a successful year for this Ohio State team is going to be a playoff, 2 playoff wins, maybe 1 will take a playoff win, but you got to make the playoffs at least. And that's not a guarantee with this schedule. Ohio State has one of the most toughest schedules in the entire Power 4. I could do an entire Ohio State video. Let's just move on. Then you got the defending national champions in the Indiana Hoosiers. They have Hoyer, their transfer quarterback, with Mendoza leaving, of course, and going to the I almost said Oakland, the Las Vegas Raiders. The Heisman Trophy winner, Omar Cooper, is gone. There's some pieces that are coming back. A lot of key transfers in Indiana, but that is Curt Cignetti's style right now. Yeah, right now, that is. This could very well change in 2-3 years here. But right now it is get transfers in, get veteran players in, and coach them up and get them ready for the NFL. And it's worked. Indiana has been 2 for 2 on playoff appearances. They did lose against Notre Dame in the first round on the road in Curt Cignetti's first year. But Indiana went undefeated last year, something that not even Ohio State has been able to do, So Indiana is the third team in the Big Ten streak to win a national championship. They're there at 4. Notre Dame, and Indiana, not in, I don't think, a roster that is do or die. Of course, being the national champions last year, I don't think this is a do or die year for Indiana, and I honestly don't think that they're in for a do or die year for a while because they're Indiana. They're not a school. They're not a blue blood, and they're not a school that maybe is demanding national championships yearly and consistently. Maybe they'll get to that point. As of right now, I don't think that is the goal, the bar, for them to set. Maybe it is internally, but I think if you just look at Indiana as a whole, as a program, I don't think their goal is national championship or bust. I just don't think that. Moving on, Notre Dame at number 5. Yet again, a do or die roster. Marcus Freeman needs to prove that he can he can win the big one. He's lost to Ohio State on the road, at home, and in a neutral field. So he's got to get over that hump. He is lost to group of 5 teams twice, which is not something you want in a short head coaching career. He lost to Marshall the week after the Ohio State game in 21, and he lost to Northern Illinois in 2024 before eventually going on and making the national championship game, but then losing to Ohio State in a game that was a lot closer on the scoreboard than it really was on the field. So Notre Dame, probably the easiest schedule in the entire Power 4, and I hate calling them in the Power 4, but it is what it is. They need to join a conference soon. It's not fair for every other team to be in a conference game, not being able to pick their schedule. I know they have this weird little connection with the ACC, but it feels like the ACC is just kind of throwing up lobs, hoping for them to join a conference soon. The playoff committee needs to get on the ball with that. They need to make it basically something that you need to join a conference to make the playoffs. And if Notre Dame doesn't like it, go join the Group of 5. And once the Group of 5 makes their own playoff, go win that playoff every year. Whatever, doesn't matter to us. But this is a year where Notre Dame it's a national championship or bust type year for Notre Dame. Miami, they're coming off a national championship appearance. Carson Beck is gone. Their D ends are gone. Most of their defense, I think, is coming back, but Reuben Bain and the other guy that I cannot think of, that's going to bug me. Both of their D ends are gone. Tony is back, though. Mark Fletcher is back. So the core of their offense is back. We'll see what they do on defense. They, I think, had a little bit of an overrated defense last year. Still bugs me that Ohio State just did not attack those linebackers in that playoff game. It just boggles my mind that the strength of that Miami defense, once again, Ohio State played into that. Drop back, play action pass, let the offensive line, make the offensive line block for you, and that was one of Ohio State's weaknesses last year on offense. Regardless, Miami in at number 6. I know technically Miami did beat Notre Dame last year, and that's actually the loss that kept Notre Dame out of the playoff last year, which is hilarious. And if you were one of these people that thinks Notre Dame should have gotten the playoff last year, I don't know what to tell you. Go watch their sport. Like, Notre Dame should not have been in the playoff last year. That was great. Miami should have been in. And Notre Dame fans can cry all they want about the playoff rankings and how Miami should not have been lower than Notre Dame if they were going to flip it at the end of the season. We can agree on that because Miami should have been ahead of Notre Dame every single playoff ranking because Notre Dame lost to Miami. Sorry. But until Marcus Freeman can win a big game, a big non-conference game, because of course Notre Dame doesn't play any conference games, but BYU is not going to be one. What is even Notre Dame's other big game on their schedule? Because I know it's full of Army and Navy and Purdue and other crap. It's just so frustrating to look at this, like look at an Ohio State game or Ohio State schedule And then look at this. Wisconsin in week 1. Okay, if you scheduled that a few years ago, I really don't blame you for that. Rice, week 2, easy victory. Michigan State, same thing as Wisconsin, don't really blame you. Purdue, dumpster fire. UNC, dumpster fire. Stanford, dumpster fire. BYU, sure, respectable. Notre Dame, there's a service academy. Miami, I'll give you that one. Boston College, dumpster fire. SMU, that's not bad. Syracuse. Like, you got 1, 2, 3 games that are maybe competition for you. Everything else, you're going to have your backups in by halftime. What are we doing? Notre Dame needs to join a conference. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Moving on. Number 7, Georgia. I know a lot of people are going to get mad at that I have Georgia that low, but it's been a couple of years since not even Georgia been to the national championship game, but they've even won a playoff game. Last year, they lost to Ole Miss in their first playoff game. The year before that, they lost to Notre Dame with a backup quarterback, but they still lost. The year before that, they didn't even make the playoff because they lost to Alabama in the national championship. The year before that, they won the national championship and were undefeated. That's 3 straight years that Georgia has not won a national or a playoff game, let alone a national championship. We're talking about the same Georgia team that had one of the better teams of this era, the college playoff era in 2021, went undefeated in 2022. That Ohio State game was the bona fide national championship, but they won that game. I'm not going to cry about it. They won that game in 2022. 2023, they looked like a top contender for the national championship, and then they lost to Alabama, who then turned around and lost to Michigan in the Rose Bowl. No excuses. Then you lose to Notre Dame. I'll give you that one because you did not have your starting quarterback. I do think Notre Dame still would have beaten you if that you had Carson Beck in that game. Of course, Carson Beck going down against Texas in the SEC championship that year in overtime. But I still think Notre Dame would have beat Georgia anyways, so not a big deal there. And then you lose to Ole Miss. Ole Miss did end up reaching the national semifinal. I don't think you have any business losing to Ole Miss, a team that was in shambles. You know, they still had Trinidad Chambliss, but they were in shambles after Lane Kiffin goes to LSU, and we'll talk about LSU obviously here in a second. But you had no business losing to LSU in the way that you, or not LSU, losing to Ole Miss in the way that you did. You just didn't. So right now, if Kirby Smart doesn't make a run, we're going to start wondering if he's lost a step, if he needs to get more with the times. But we'll have to wait and see. So Georgia at 7. Texas Tech at 8. I would have had them higher, but Brendan Sorsby is gone. He is not coming back, and good. That should not have been a thing. This should not have gone for as long as it did. Brendan Sorsby is not even in the NFL, not in the CFL, not in the UFL, not in college football. He is facing the consequences of his actions, and I think that's a good thing right now. You cannot bet on your own team. Point blank, period. You can't do it regardless if you were a redshirt freshman, regardless of how good your program was at the time. You can't do it. He's facing the consequences of his actions. He is going to most likely be ended up declaring for the draft next year. We'll see where he goes because he's going to come off of a year without playing football professionally or collegiately, and he's got baggage with him with this scandal. And he's not going to be a top 5 or not a first-round quarterback in this quarterback draft class that we think is going to be in there. Dante Moore, Arch Manning, Julian Sayin, Trinidad Chambliss. Maybe there's another quarterback like a Fernando Mendoza last year. Maybe Indiana's quarterback can rise up. So right there, that's 5 at least that I'm thinking of right now. Guaranteed 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 that I can think of that would be better options than Brendan Sorsby. Anyways, Texas Tech, they got to figure out that quarterback, but if they do figure out that quarterback, they'll be a top 5 team. This is another roster that could have been a do or die roster if Brendan Sorsby would have stayed out of trouble. But for right now, they're going to be at 8, which is still pretty good, if I'm being honest. Number 9, Oklahoma. I'm iffy on Oklahoma. If I would have just been looking at this and been like, oh, Oklahoma's at 9, I don't know about that, but it just kind of how it fell. I think they are better than LSU. I think they're better than USC. I think they're better than Michigan. We'll talk about Texas A&M here in a second. This is kind of where they fell. I don't think that if you would have told me, Dylan, where do you think Oklahoma is in the country? I would probably say top 15, top 10-ish. So they're right there at 9. I guess that's not horrible. I'm just not a believer really in Oklahoma right now. I know they got a couple of people back. We'll see. LSU, this is going to be a big deal because LSU can either fall on their face this year and it would be one of the best things to watch, or they can be a college football playoff contender in year 1, and Lane Kiffin looks like a genius for leaving Ole Miss because whether you like it or not, LSU is a blue blood. Most likely, they're on the verge, I guess, of being a blue blood. They won a national championship in 2019. They have been SEC contenders for the majority of this era, I should say. They've made SEC championships. Like I just said, they won a national championship in 2019 with Joe Burrow and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and all of them. We'll see, because I don't feel like there's an in-between. I feel like they're a playoff contender or they fall flat in their face. Either one, I don't really see it in the middle. So I have them at 10 for right now. We'll see where that goes. USC I'm actually pretty high on right now. Also another team that Ohio State is playing this year. This is strictly if Lincoln Riley can somehow put together a defense. Because if he can't, USC's going right back down the rankings right now. I feel like I might have jumped the gun a little bit here. We'll see. Because this offense is going to be a top 15, top 10 offense in their sleep, most likely. It's about this defense and if they can. We've heard it all before with strength and conditioning, different defensive coordinators, different defensive philosophy, different players, transfers, blah, 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 blah. We've heard all of this from Lincoln Riley before. We just got to see it on the field. And if this is a different era where playing Pac-12 football, playing, Big 12 football, and winning a game 56-52, it's not going to be successful. It's not going to be a successful formula for you. This isn't a 4-team era where Oklahoma is making playoffs in their sleep against a down Big 12 and then getting bounced in round 1 against a team like Alabama or Clemson. It's just not going to happen. Or LSU as well. Moving on, we have Michigan, and I feel like this is a pretty good spot for them right now. I feel like the hire that they made with Kyle Whittingham sets a floor for them. They have Bryce Underwood. We'll see what happens with that because, we've heard words about how Bryce Underwood is not really fitting well with this Michigan staff. We'll see. It just feels like words for right now. But this is going to be interesting. This is going to be an interesting year because Michigan could very well be on that verge. Yet again, they have one of the hardest schedules this year. They play Michigan State in a rivalry game. They play Ohio State in a rivalry game. They play Oklahoma. They play, I believe, Indiana in a couple weeks before the Ohio State game. They play Oregon in the Big House. They might not play Indiana, but they did for sure play Oregon, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Michigan State, when you can throw records out of the window with that game. I know Michigan has had Michigan State's number since 2021, but anything can happen. We've seen crazier things happen before. So I feel like this is a good little place for Michigan. Maybe it's a little bit too high considering what they bring back. I know they still have Marsh. They are losing their top running back in Haynes. He hit the transfer portal, so we'll see what happens with their running back room, but it's Michigan. They're always going to have good offensive line. They're always going to have good trenches. That's just what it is. It's just a matter of, can these wide receivers and these tight ends make enough difference where defenses are going to have to respect the Michigan passing game instead of just lining up and playing in a phone booth. And that's what Michigan was really good in the end of that Jim Harbaugh era, is you could play like an Ohio State team did in 2022 and load the box and protect and go all out for the run game, but you're also leaving your secondary on one-on-ones with a receiver and tight end unit that can make you pay when you give them the opportunity. They're not going to be these guys that are going to light you up for 400 yards, but they can make you pay if you leave the door open. And that's exactly what Michigan did that year. You can argue what happened with Connor Stallions. Let's leave him out of this for right now and just say that Michigan played fair and square, which they didn't. But let's say that they did. They had receivers that could make you pay, in a tight end room that could also make you pay. That's what Michigan needs right now. They're going to have good trench play. We'll see what happens with that. Texas A&M at 13. I am so down on Texas A&M. They have Marcel Reed coming back. Who else? Offensive line is gone. They never really had great wide receivers. Their defense is a little suspect. I feel like they kind of benefited from a really, really weak schedule last year. They went 11-2. They lost to Texas and I almost said Ole Miss, Miami in the playoffs. So they did go 11-0, but then lost their last two games. One in the playoff in a game that really could have gone either way because of the weather at that point with the wind and all that. And they lost to a Texas team that was really hot at the end of the year, but just didn't have enough to make the playoff. So, no, I'm low on Texas A&M. I should say. I don't think they're going to make the playoff. If you made me do a playoff prediction really early in the preseason, I'd have Texas A&M completely out. I wouldn't even have them in my first two out. I've had that maybe 20. I just don't. I'm not a believer in Texas A&M. We'll see what happens with that. Washington is a team that I have next, and they could really, really fly under the radar here, and they kind of are flying under the radar a little bit. They had that whole quarterback drama with I'm going to the transfer portal. JK, I'm not. We'll see what happens with that. They do play Oregon. Of course, not the end of the year. I don't think they play on rivalry weekend anymore. But let's take a look at their schedule right now while I have this up here. They avoid Ohio State, which is something that is good. They play Washington State, which is really, really cool for the old rivalries. Of course, Washington State was one of the teams that was left behind when the Big 12 or Pac-12, I should say, disbanded. Washington left and went with Oregon to the Big 10. Washington State, of course, was left behind. So they play Washington State on September 6th in Week 1. Utah State, which is okay. Eastern Washington, okay. Minnesota, we'll see what happens with that. USC, I think that'll be a really good game and a really good test of where USC is. If Washington goes in and destroys USC, then USC is just going to be the same USC that they had for the past 10 years, a team that can beat you offensively but can't beat you and can't hold anything on defensively. Iowa, I think that's going to be a test for Washington. It is in Washington, I do believe. Yes, it is. So it is in Washington. We'll see what happens with Iowa with going all the way out there. We've seen a lot of struggles with teams going from Iowa's not really coast, but they're used to just playing on that East Coast area. Now they got to go all the way out to Washington. So that'll be an environment. Washington also has an environment that's very, very underrated. So that'll be a test for them. Purdue, they'll handle Purdue most likely. Nebraska, they'll handle Nebraska. They're going to be on a down year. Penn State, yet again, Penn State's got to go to Washington, so that'll be more of a test for Penn State, I should say. But we'll see what happens with that. I feel like that'll be a really good game. Michigan State, they're going to be in it's going to be bad for Michigan State, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because I really do like Michigan State. The Big Ten is a lot better when Michigan State is good. And then these last two games are about as rough as you can get. Indiana at home and then Oregon on the road. So not great when it comes to their last two games. Probably one of the worst results you could hope for if you were Washington in those last two games with Indiana. And then, of course, your rival Oregon on the road. So not great. But I do like Washington this year. I think that their roster is being very underrated. Their coaching staff is pretty good. I don't think it's anything special, but I think it's pretty good. So Washington's there. BYU, another team that just has that floor of being right there. I don't think they're going to be a top contender in these playoff runs or anything like that, but you know, they're always going to have that floor, and I don't see that floor coming out from underneath them anytime soon. They did lose one of their coordinators to Michigan with Kyle Whittingham, so we'll see what happens on that side of the ball for BYU. But yet again, I just think that BYU has a certain floor, and it's kind of risen over the past in this modern age of college football. Alabama, I really hope I'm wrong on putting Alabama this high. that's how bad I am. That Alabama has kind of become, from being a national contender and basically demanding national championships every year, and going from a team that maybe could make the playoff, but they're not going to make any noise. They, of course, got dominated by Indiana in the Rose Bowl last year in their first 12-team playoff appearance. And, of course, 2 years ago, they were one of the teams that were complaining and complaining and moaning and complaining about not making the playoff. They did beat Oklahoma last year in Norman, which was, I believe, the first time that a road, at that point, that a road team won in the first round of the college football playoff, which was really impressive. But they just got dominated by Indiana, and to be completely honest, regardless of what team won that game, they were going to get manhandled by Indiana in that game. Then you have the Penn State Cyclones, as I like to call them. Matt Campbell in at head coach for the Nittany Lions, and he's bringing basically his entire team at Iowa State to Happy Valley, and this is going to be a year where Matt Campbell's going to have to get used to the Big Ten style of play, a lot different than the Big 12. He is used to playing a team like Iowa, which I do believe Penn State does play this year. I could very well be wrong on that. Oh, they don't play Iowa this year. That's interesting. I thought Iowa was I guess not really. It's not a protected rivalry, so I guess they don't play every year. But he does have experience with playing Big Ten teams with the Iowa State rivalry that's been going on for basically his entire coaching career at Iowa State, if not all of his coaching career at Iowa State. So that'll be interesting to see what he can do. He plays Marshall, which is not. It's not like this is going to be anything new for Marshall. Going into Penn State, they play Temple and then Buffalo, 2, 3, or I should say 3. No group of 4, or Jesus, I'm all over the place. I'm sorry. No Power 4 opponents in their non-conference schedule. Then they go and play Wisconsin, a team that is going to be most likely in the bottom of the barrel. Northwestern, same thing. Penn State, USC, that'll be a test for them. Yet again, that is going to be a measuring stick for both of those teams. You play Michigan. I wouldn't say they call this a rivalry, but it's been a competitive matchup. If you've ever looked up the Penn State whiteout, that was against Michigan. Michigan had a game a couple of years ago with Sharon Moore where they did not throw the ball. I believe it was the entire fourth quarter, if not the entire second half, and still won the game. Michigan did. And that was their national championship year, if I'm not mistaken. And that was on the road in Happy Valley, I believe. So this game has been a little bit more lean towards Michigan, but always a competitive game. So we'll see what happens with that. Purdue, they're at the bottom of the barrel of the Big Ten. Washington, like I said before, going to be a test for both of those teams. Minnesota, mid-level, but mostly in the bottom part of the Big Ten Conference. Rutgers, kind of in the same place where Minnesota is, and then Maryland. They've been respectable, but I think they're in for a down year this year. So Penn State avoids the majority of the toughest tests. They avoid Indiana, they avoid Oregon, they avoid Ohio State this year. So if there was going to be a team where they might slide in to the college football playoff because of their schedule, like Alabama or Texas A&M did, or I can't even, if there's going to be a team that gets in because of their schedule so weak, maybe like Notre Dame, that's not Notre Dame. I think it could be Penn State. So that's where I have them at 17, but I could very well see them getting into the playoff this year. SMU, this is my dark horse for an ACC. I know everyone has gotten their eyes on Miami, but if Miami does not win, I think SMU has a pretty good shot. I believe Jennings is back at quarterback. They've always kind of had that floor. They did kind of fall off last year, did not make the playoff again last year, but they did make the playoff 2 years ago in the first ever 12-team playoff. Did lose to Penn State in Happy Valley that year, but Penn State also made the semifinal that year, so I guess it's not a horrible loss there, especially in an environment that is one of a top 3 environment when it's at its peak in college football in Happy Valley. So we'll see what happens with SMU. I think with the ACC kind of being weaker than the rest of the Power 4, Clemson not in anywhere noticeably. Right now, I should say, Clemson not necessarily a threat. Florida State, there's no way they're going to be a threat. You know, you have Miami, so we'll see what happens with that. I just think that if there was going to be a dark horse that's not a Miami to win the ACC, and Miami continues their streak of never winning the ACC, I feel like my pick would be SMU. So I have them at 18. Tennessee at 19. They're starting completely over here, especially at the quarterback position. They just lost their quarterback. Did appeal the eligibility rule. That got denied, thank God. But I've said this before, I think. If Ohio State just disappeared and I had to pick a new team to root for in college football, it would be Tennessee. So maybe this is a little bit of a homer pick, I guess you could say. But I guess I really got no intel on what's going on there in Knoxville. I know they lost their quarterback, and that's really all I necessarily know about Tennessee. I'm sorry, I probably should know a lot more about Tennessee, with them being, I guess, my second favorite college football team, besides like local ones. But I really got nothing on Tennessee. So they're at 19, Ole Miss at 20. Ole Miss could fall out of my rankings entirely, I guess, by the end of the year. They, of course, hired their defensive coordinator as their head coach on a team that struggled on defense. That's like Ohio State. If Ryan Day went to the NFL in 2020, that's like Ohio State hiring Kerry Combs as their head coach. Who thought that would be a good idea? Nobody? Okay. So, yes, Ole Miss did have that run that they did in the playoff. I think that was more of a spiteful move against Lane Kiffin for leaving, rather than a team that was one of the 4 best teams in all of college football that made the national semifinal. They did lose to eventual runner-up in Miami. But it's just, I don't see it for Ole Miss. Them and Texas A&M, I think, are my top 2 teams that could very well fall out of my rankings right now. If I had to choose 2 teams that I could very well be wrong on, it'd be Texas A&M and Ole Miss. Iowa, kind of same thing with BYU, just to a lesser degree. Iowa kind of sets a floor for themselves right now, and I don't really see them getting any higher, but I also don't really find them any lower than the 20 to 25 range here. So I have them at 21. Houston, a Big 12 team. I had to put something in here for the Big 12. It's just not a conference that anyone really looks at. You know, SEC and Big 10. And, you know, there's not a lot. You got Texas Tech, and you got, you know, BYU, and then there's Houston. So I feel like Houston could be another dark horse contender for the Big 12 if somehow Texas Tech falls on their face. I don't see it happening, but if you had to pick, you know, other than Texas Tech, who are the best 2 teams in the Big 12, I'd probably say Houston and BYU. So that's why they're there at 22. Oklahoma State, I've heard a lot of people talking about how this could be a year where Oklahoma State surprises some people. So that's why I have them in there at 23. Louisville, another team that could be a dark horse for that ACC title game if Miami somehow does not make it again. So I have them there. They could very well be playing Miami in the Big 12, the ACC championship game upcoming here. So I do have them at 24. And then I wanted to get a group of 5 team in there at 25. So I just went with James Madison, a playoff team from last year. They very well could just not be very good. I just wanted to get a group of 5 team in there as well. So that is going to do it for my preseason top 25. If you have any comments on my top 25, maybe of I put a team too high or put a team too low or I missed a team, please let me know. Maybe even put your own top 25 down there in the comment section. I appreciate you guys watching if you had made it this far in the video, and I'll see you when I see you.